So you'll know if the certificate of analysis module is turned on if you have this menu item here on the left-hand side. Because pretty much everything you can do with this module is contained within sort of the sub-menu items here. So the way you want to start out, the first piece is creating standard specs, or let's say creating spec headings. So this would be the types of things that you want to keep track of, like the apparent viscosity of the product, for example. So you can add new ones or edit existing ones where the system comes with these 100 or so defaults, but you can add new ones and you can make adjustments. So for example, you can say, we want to keep track of the apparent viscosity of products, right? So if you click into that, there's a couple of different menu items here where you can say, when we're reporting on this, are we consolidating on the certificate of analysis all lots, or are we listing out each one separately? How are these values reported? Is it a number? In this case, yes, it's a number. Could it be alpha? Like, for example, color would be, that's just a word, right? So is an alpha, or is it a yes, no? In other words, does it contain this or not, right? Then we're saying when buyers are producing these, do they, in what way do they want them? So in this case, we said apparent viscosity, it must be an equal is what they're saying. So they're going to specify the exact value that is their requirement. And then the producers, they're providing a range. In other words, the viscosity is between, say, 2 and 4%, something like that. And then there's trailer text. So when we're reporting this on our certificate of analysis document, what text do we want to appear after the value? And then is it per unit or is it total? And then you can have a second trailer text as well. So this is where you're sort of creating the different pieces that you want to keep track of. And then once those have been created, then you can start creating purchase standard specifications. So default specification values that you want to provide for each product. So for example, let's try acetone, for example. I'll just type it in, acetone. So we're saying when we buy acetone, these are the specification requirements that we're buying it under. The melting point must have a maximum of 100 degrees centigrade. The methyl content must be exactly 4%. So for each of these, you can add new ones. You just enter a specification number. And let's say I add the number 6, and we'll say add specification. Then it brings up all those spec headings. These are all things that we created earlier. So let's say apparent viscosity, for example. So we're adding the apparent viscosity. And remember that we said that when the producers are providing, they're providing exact value. So the value must be 5%, for example, or 5. I don't know what that trailer text means, maybe parts per million or something. So we're saying must be exactly 5. And you're sort of breaking down how you want these. Now you can actually create separate sets of specification references. So in other words, if we buy acetone in different grades, for example, we have our default grade that meets these spec, where we're saying that when we're buying this, it has to meet these spec requirements, or we can have like a high grade in which the specs are a little bit tighter. So in other words, the melting point has a maximum of say 90 degrees or lower. So you're sort of tightening up the specifications or relaxing them based on the different spec reference that you want. So that's how you're managing the purchase standard specification. So these are different ways in which you might buy it. So I'll save that. Yeah, and here's where if you wanted to add a new spec reference or a new way in which you might want to buy it, like I was saying, the high grade or low grade, you just say add spec there. So that's the purchase standard specification. And then we can also say there's customer specifications. So we're saying that when customers order this from us, what are their specific requirements? So let's pick a customer, for example, 3 Brothers. And we're saying, oops, acetone. So we're saying when 3 Brothers purchases acetone from us, they have these spec requirements. So notice there's less here. They're not as stringent as we are on the purchasing side, but they have their own specific set of spec requirements, and you can adjust those. A couple of other settings here that are relevant, where we're saying, when we're creating a certificate analysis for this customer, do we want to include all specifications or only the ones they care about? Because we could provide all the specifications that came back from the actual C of A that we received from the supplier, or we can just say only display the ones that they're saying they care about. Do we want to include the producer's name on the customer certificate of analysis or not? Are we trying to hide that? And do we want to include the customer's specification requirements alongside the actual product specs or not? So these are sort of different settings that you can apply here. So I'm going to save this and say, okay, that's the way that this customer buys it by default. And the same way we said, you can have multiple spec references on the purchase side, where I was saying like you can have different grades. The same is true on the sales side. So let's say we want to create a new purchase order for that acetone product. I'm going to come to the purchase order area and say plus button, say we want to add a new one. And I'll pick a vendor from the supplier list here. Let's say this Chemtech. And we're going to be buying acetone. So I'll go into the line details, pick acetone. And let's say we want to buy 20 metric tons, and it brings in our price by default was $468 per ton. And now we can, let me just scroll over a little here. So we're specifying here, we're going to copy the default set of spec requirements. So now we're saying spec reference name is default. So we're choosing the default way in which we want to buy this. So we're providing these spec requirements to the supplier. So that information would show up on the purchase order document. And now when we actually receive them or receive the supplier's C of A, we're going to enter those details in associated with each of the lots that have been defined. So I'm going to, let's say this purchase order is all good. We're going to go ahead and create a container out of this. And that created this container number, which it just grabbed the PO number for the container number, but we can modify that to the actual container number when we receive it. But I just wanted to make a point that the container must at least be in transit before you can enter the certificate of analysis against it. I'm just going to go ahead and actually receive this into the warehouse as well. And we'll choose the warehouse that we're receiving into, let's say this one. And now I'm going to enter so at this point I have all the documents from the supplier, packing list, invoice, bill lading and everything, as well as the certificate of analysis. Now I'm going to enter the values of that C of A into the system. So when I go into this C of A area, I'm going to enter venture C of A. So in this case, this is the purchase order number, or the venture number is 8450. So I'm going to go into this venture C of A, and I'm just going to sort this by date. It should be one of the first ones that pops up. Yes, this one. And let's say we want to maintain it. So now you'll notice that all the spec headings that are displayed here, it's choosing all the specification requirements that we said we care about when we buy acetone. These are the things that we care about. And as soon as we click into one, it shows us what our spec requirement is. So in this case, we said our spec requirement was a maximum of 100 degrees Celsius for the melting point. And let's say I'm reading off of the supplier C of A right now, and I'm going to say they gave us a 98-degree melting point. And this value had to be 4%. Okay, fine. So by the way, notice how these are showing in red and these are showing as white. In red means either it hasn't been defined, spec requirement has not been defined, or whatever is entered doesn't fit your requirement. So it's basically warning you. Like in this case, I'm saying that the maximum is 16, but if we put maximum is 15, if we put 16 there, see how it stays in red? Because it's telling us we're accepting this product from this supplier. We're accepting even though it doesn't meet our requirements, right? So it's giving you that warning. It'll let you save it, but it is warning you that the product that you're receiving in does not meet your requirements. So I'm just going to change it and say it's 14, and chloride has a maximum of 2%. Let's say it's 1. Acid insolubles is maximum 2%. Let's say it's 1. And apparent viscosity, we said, has to be 5 exactly. So, okay, let's say it's 5. And then we can put comments in here too. This gets saved. Let's just say sample appears to be of high quality, something like that. And then we'll click done, which, by the way, if there's multiple lots in this container, each lot will show as a separate column here, and you can enter the values for each of the lots. Because if the values are different from one lot to the next, that information all gets stored at the lot level. So now we can save that, and those details are now associated with that particular lot. Now let's say we want to sell that lot. So I'm going to go into the sales order side, and let's say we want to create a new sales order. And I'll pick customer here from the customer list, and we're going to choose that customer that we already set up the spec requirements for. This company's called Three Brothers. And let's say we're going to sell them acetone. And let's say it's going to be 10 metric tons of acetone. And now we're saying we're going to copy the spec reference. So we're choosing which specific set of specification requirements we're selling it to them on. So we have the customer spec. This is their specific Three Brothers customer spec. Or we could just say, we just use the default product spec. In this case, we're going to choose the actual customer spec. It selects that. And now we're going to take this order and allocate this against inventory. So if we go into the general info area here, and let's say the customer has approved the order. So we're changing the status to SO issued. It takes a second to flash, and now we're going to allocate this against inventory. So click here and brings us into this area where we can pull up the specific lots that are available to allocate against. And you'll notice for each of them, there's a question here of, does this lot meet that customer spec requirements or not? So again, it will let you allocate against something. In other words, this product is not good enough for this customer according to their spec requirements. It'll still let us do it, but it's very clear here, it's in red that it doesn't meet that customer's requirements. Also, you'll see if there are pre-allocations that exist, then that's displayed here too. It's basically saying, we've already earmarked this lot for another customer. I mean, if you want to take it, you can, but it's pretty clear that it's already earmarked for a customer. So these are all yes, those are no's. So it's sort of a combination of some of the lots meet their requirements and some don't. I'm going to grab this one, which is the one that we just entered. And actually, this lot does meet their requirements. So I'm going to allocate against that. So that's the allocation piece. Now we can just sort of leave it in that allocation status if we wanted to, or we can take it one step further and say we're actually ready to go ahead and ship this product out to the customer. So we'll change it to release to logistics and click done. And then in terms of producing the C of A for the customer, that's done in the C of A menu here. So it's called the release C of A. So this is customer side certificate of analysis. And I'll pick the one that we just created, which is this. So we'll select it. Creates the certificate of analysis document. Now this document template is customizable. What I'm showing is the default version here. But obviously it would have your company logo and address and everything. And then it has the order number, the product, the quantity, and then these are the actual lot details. And then this is displaying what the customer's requirements were. So it says what they said they wanted. So that can just be emailed out. You can email that out with when you send out the invoice or when you send out the packing list or any of the other documents that this gets emailed out, either as a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet, up to you.